What if I told you there was a moment in India's history where the nation's fate was decided behind closed doors? A moment where powerful global institutions didn't just offer help, they allegedly rewrote the rules of the Indian economy, not through colonization, not through war, but through debt. In 1991, India stood at the edge of a financial cliff. Foreign reserves were so low, the country could barely pay for 2 weeks of imports. And then the International Monetary Fund stepped in. But here's the mystery: was this bailout a lifeline from a global partner, or the moment India surrendered economic control in exchange for survival? Because the deal that followed didn't just rescue India, it reshaped the nation's financial system, privatized industries, dismantled decades of economic policy, and created a new class of winners and losers that still shape India today. Today, we're going to uncover the truth. A truth that reveals how a single bailout may have changed the trajectory of 1.3 billion people, and why some believe the IMF didn't just help India, they hijacked it. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which side you stand on. Before the bailout, we need to understand how India got here. And to do that, we go back to a very different India. India's economy after 1947 was built on something called the License Raj, a system where government licenses controlled industries, imports, banking, and even how much a factory could produce. This system had a purpose: protect India from foreign exploitation, make the country self-sufficient, prevent corporate monopolies. But there was a cost. Growth was slow, investment was limited, imports were expensive, and public sector companies, while big, often lacked efficiency. By the 1980s, India tried to modernize. Borrowing increased, foreign debt rose, government spending ballooned, and then came the spark that ignited the explosion. 1990, Gulf War, oil prices skyrocketed, imports became unaffordable, investor confidence collapsed, foreign reserves evaporated. At one point, India had just $1.2 billion left, barely enough for 2 weeks of imports. Imagine this: a nation of hundreds of millions, with the fuel supply of a small city. This was not just a crisis, it was checkmate, and that's when the IMF appeared, not as a negotiator, but as a last resort. In 1991, India requested an emergency loan, a bailout worth around $2.2 billion, but the IMF said, money comes with conditions, and these conditions weren't small, they weren't temporary, they were transformational. The IMF demanded deregulation of markets, privatization of state-owned companies, reduction of trade barriers, currency devaluation, removal of subsidies, opening the economy to foreign investment. In other words, the death of the old system and the birth of a new one. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an economic rewrite. And the people holding the pen, not India. This is the moment most textbooks conveniently skip. To secure the IMF loan, India had to put up collateral. Not just money, not policy, but gold. 300 tons of gold, flown out of India, to the Bank of England and the Bank of Japan. Imagine the symbolism. Centuries after colonial plunder, India shipped out its gold again, not to invaders, but to the global financial system. For many, this wasn't just economics, it was humiliation, a public reminder that India was no longer in control. On July 24, 1991, India announced sweeping reforms that would become historic. This date is often remembered as the start of liberalization, privatization, and globalization, the LPG era. What changed? Government monopoly gives foreign competition, state-owned companies gives privatization and disinvestment, rupee devalued gives exports boosted, stock markets opened to foreign investment, tariffs slashed gives global trade exploded, corporate taxes reformed gives private sector grew. India entered the global economy, and the effects were dramatic. The good, GDP growth accelerated, tech and service sectors exploded, foreign companies invested heavily, a new middle class emerged. Poverty dropped in several regions, the hidden costs, millions of jobs lost in protected industries. Small manufacturers collapsed under foreign competition. Agriculture suffered from subsidy cuts, wealth inequality skyrocketed, foreign corporations gained massive influence. So was this a rescue or a restructuring? A handout or a takeover? Winners corporate, IT and service sectors, investors, urban middle class, multinational companies, losers, small farmers, local manufacturers, rural communities, state employees, millions on government subsidies. This wasn't just an economic shift, it was a class shift. The old winners became the new losers, the old losers became the new winners. Power moved, influence changed, and the IMF by design, or by accident, became the architect. Arguments that it was a handout saved India from default, kick-started economic growth, integrated India into global trade, reduced poverty in some regions, modernized industries and infrastructure. Arguments that it was a hijacking, IMF-dictated policy, not India. Gold collateral symbolized subservience, markets were open to fast, domestic industries were unprotected, new dependence on foreign capital emerged. So, which is true? Here's the twist. Both the bailout rescued India, and it reprogrammed. Just like a computer virus that fixes your system and installs a new operating system while it's at it. India survived, but it didn't leave as the same country. This isn't just history, it's a pattern. Countries in crisis are often given help, but the fine print reveals a transformation. Sri Lanka 2022, IMF demanded tax reforms, privatization, subsidy cuts. Pakistan 2023, currency devalued, fuel subsidies removed, energy prices surged. Argentina repeated, IMF loans, a cycle of debt, reforms, crisis. Repeat. The IMF's model is consistent. Fix the crisis by restructuring the system to match global economic norms, led by Western financial institutions. Some call this modernization, others call it economic imperialism. You decide. Was the IMF bailout a handout? Yes, it saved India. Was it a hijacking? In some ways, yes, because saving someone doesn't mean you didn't change them. Sometimes the biggest transformations come disguised as help. 3 takeaways. India's bailout was not charity, it was a transaction that traded economic policy for financial survival. The reforms created opportunity but also inequality. The winners and losers were not chosen by chance. Debt isn't just money, it's influence, it's leverage, it's power. As the world enters new economic crises, as inflation rises, as countries turn to global institutions, ask yourself, is history repeating? And if it is, who will control the future? If this opened your eyes, if it made you question what you thought you knew, then like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, do you think the IMF saved India, or took control? Your opinion matters, because the story isn't over, we're still living in it. See you in the next video.